When I was 12, my family lived in a house that had a very large pond behind it. Think less of a pond, but more of a very small lake. So when we first moved to this house, the neighbor's son was always out at the pond fishing. When I would talk to him, he would always swear that there was an absolutely huge catfish in the pond. He really wanted to catch it, but was never able to. He said he knew that it was there, because he had seen it eat some of the baby ducks and geese that lived there. He watched them get sucked down under the water while swimming on the surface. I thought it was interesting that fish could eat baby ducks, but never really gave it a second thought. The neighbor's son eventually moved out. He never did catch the catfish. After living there a few years, I was probably around 16. I finally saw what my neighbor's son was fishing for, or at least saw its effects. My friend was spending the night, just hanging out playing video games all night on some random weekend, when we heard the ducks on the pond completely losing it. This was around midnight, and normally we didn't hear ducks inside, so we had to see what was going on. At first, we didn't notice anything. It just seemed like the ducks were going crazy every once in a while for no reason. We had a lot of ducks and geese on this pond. One day my dad counted like around 300. At this point, around 10 or 20 would fly off the pond for a little while and then come back down, the whole time freaking out. Then we noticed it. The ducks were being pulled under. We watched as several ducks were pulled under the surface by something, and all the ducks around it would flip out and move away from that spot. It was insane. I've seen ducks dive for food before, and this wasn't that. They would kind of struggle as if they were being pulled down, throwing their wings and head up as they went down. It seemed like something was grabbing their legs and pulling them down. And let me clarify, these were not baby ducks. They were full-grown adult ducks being pulled under and not resurfacing. The next day, we told everyone, and very few people believed us, as these things usually go. Never really saw anything like it again, and had stopped thinking about it until one night, something happened. It was a cool summer night, and the window was open. I was playing a game on my Nintendo when I heard something outside. It sounded like someone with big sloshy wet boots was stomping through mud. I was sitting on my bed next to the window looking at my game when I first heard the sound. It sounded like whatever it was walking down the fence line to the pond. I jumped off my bed to go and look out the window. When I looked out, I saw what I can barely describe. At the end of our fence, about 20 feet away from the pond, was this giant brown and black mass of something. The size of it was around a small car, and it was rounded, kinda like Cousin It, with two shiny black eyes near the top. It was looking right at me. As soon as my eyes met its eyes, I collapsed with fear. I had never felt anything near that level of fear before in my life. One time, I almost died from car surfing, and the fear I felt then was a drop in a bucket to what I felt when my eyes locked into whatever this was. I laid there on the floor, unable to move, unable to breathe, and listened to the creature walk to the pond. I heard splashing, and that was it. I laid there for what seemed like hours, and eventually moved to my bed and stayed awake in fear all night. I just stared at the window. No idea what it was. I think about it often.
First of all, I've dealt with paranormal things, like shadow people, things moving without anyone touching them, etc. And I swear, this is a legit story. A year ago in May, 2020, my parents were going on their annual trip to Florida with my 3 brothers for the week. my mother asked me if I could go by their house and feed the family dogs, or stay at the house and house sit. Being the daughter I am, I told my mother I would just stay at their house to save on gas. Throughout the week, at night, I would bring the 2 dogs inside to feel safer, since my parents live on somewhat of a back road. Keep in mind, my parents' house is surrounded by trees, and there is a thick tree line separating their house from the 2 neighbors. Well, one night, while I was at the house alone, I'd called my best friend Bailey to come over and stay the night. We were going to do what 2 middle-aged 20-year-old females do when alone. Play video games, watch movies, TikToks, and drink a little. While Bailey and I were in the kitchen, at around 3 or 4 in the morning, making homemade funnel cakes like the fatties we are, the dogs kept moving around and staring at the glass kitchen door that led off to the back porch. I asked Bailey to let them out there so they could chill and we would have enough legroom while we were cooking. While we were eating our funnel cakes, we came across a TikTok about making homemade temporary tattoos with a printed picture and perfume. Now keep in mind my parents have about 3.82 acres of land. So there's the family house, my father's 2-door garage workshop, and a large pole barn. Those 2 buildings are farther out near that tree line. So Bailey and I walk down to the workshop to go into my parents' work office. I punch in the code to the garage door and we go inside, straight to the computer, and print out each other a picture of Kylo Ren to try and make into a temporary tattoo for each other. Before I go any further, a little side note. My parents have security cameras all around their property, and inside the office is a television above the desk showing all of the live footage from the cameras. So while I was cutting out the tattoo for Bailey, she says, "What's that?" I stop cutting and look up to the cameras. At first I didn't see anything except for a small figure in front of the pole barn. It looked like it was sniffing at the garage door. I shrugged it off and told her that it was probably one of the many stray dogs that roamed around the area. Bailey nudged my arm quickly after I said that and pointed to the screen again. Wanting to prove to her that it was just a stray dog, I stood up and looked closer to the screen, and when I did, I saw the figure. But it didn't look like one of those small dogs I had seen before. The creature was hunched over on all 4s. Its arms were super thin and long, but pointing outwards from its chest. Kinda like how you'd imagine the girl from The Exorcist to be when she was crawling on all 4s. It had no fur. Its skin looked tight on its body. I went to the door to open it and look at it, but Bailey stopped me right when I grabbed the lock on the door. Looking back at the screen, at the creature, it looked like it had scratched the door of the pole barn. I immediately said, "What the hell is that?" And the creature turned its head straight at the camera, like it was this scene from The Office. When its head turned, I couldn't make out clear facial features, but it looked like it had a human head with 2 big glowing eyes. Bailey and I screamed, and it bolted, and I mean bolted, off screen. Clearly freaked out, Bailey and I hugged each other, like that would protect us. Then something smashed against the garage door. Not once, but twice. Like, you know that sound when someone smacks the garage door with their hand from the outside? Just like that. I called my grandmother and told her we thought we saw something and to stay on the phone with us until we ran into the house. Once we got in the house, we brought the dogs in, locked every single door, and took shots of Crown until we were asleep. Now, we talked about this a few times, and I think it was a Wendigo. But Bailey thinks it was a skinwalker. But now, I'm starting to think it was a crawler.
So in March, my friend and I decided to have a fire. Since we were in Maryland, it's still really cold around that time. We invited 2 friends over to join us. Side note, we normally have a stock of chicken livers to feed the fox around here, and we put them outside my friend's window to watch the fox eat them. So while we're talking around the fire and drinking some beer, I had the grand idea of taking the rest of the chicken livers and putting them behind the detached garage in the woods. There's a game camera, so the plan was to put the livers in front of it to see whatever animal was lurking deeper in the woods. So I grabbed the livers, I grabbed my friend, and we go back down the 250 to 300 foot driveway. It's about 11 PM, so we have our phone flashlights on. We get down behind the garage, and I hear walking in the woods. I told my friend to shut up and listen, and he said he didn't hear anything. We take a few more steps, and he finally hears it. We stop again, and listen, and there's nothing. We're about 10 or 15 feet from the tree line, and I take one step, see movement off to my right slightly, and I shine my phone light over there. There was a white face looking at us from behind a fallen tree, but I didn't pay much attention to it because I was drinking. Then it starts running back and forth in front of us, right within the tree line. It's so fast, and the movement seems so odd, but yet graceful for its height and speed. We're panicking, trying to get our lights on it, and after about 10 seconds of this, both of our lights hit it, and it stops dead in its tracks. It was somewhere from 6 to 7 feet tall, super skinny. I could see its tendons in its arms and legs, super long arms that came past its knees, obviously long legs as well. It was running on 2 feet and stopped in a weird position, not facing us, yet it had its head turned towards us. It didn't really have any facial features, nothing in its eye sockets. Our phones reflected off its pale skin. It seemed like we sat there staring at each other for minutes. I eventually screamed and ran so fast and left my friend behind. He eventually followed suit and was running behind me. Of course, when I was running, I tripped and fell, but I just sat there, listening, and I didn't hear anything, so I thought we were in the clear. My friend did say he thought he heard it running beside us in the woods while we were running back up the driveway. I had no idea what it was and felt absolutely crazy until my friend kept reassuring me that he saw it too. Throughout the night, we kept hearing walking in the woods and would get nervous. Nothing crazy has really happened in the woods since, until last night. My friend and I decided to have another fire since fall is finally in the air. It was just us two this time. We heard a weird animal, which was later established to be a screech owl, near the bamboo in front of the woods. We also heard what sounded like a dog being beaten or attacked from the neighbor's property across the street. They have no dogs. Then, finally around 1 AM, the fire was starting to die down. Across the street again, we hear this terrifying screeching noise. I can only describe it as tires squealing and then a human yelling at the same time. We immediately put the fire out and went to go inside through the side door. As we were opening the screen door, something was running up the side of the house towards us very fast. I wish I had the courage to peek my head out around the corner. We had the window cracked last night listening for noises, and we kept hearing weird screeching noises throughout the night. it's weird because it didn't feel threatening until 2 nights ago with the screeching. It was like a high-pitched squeal with a lower voice screaming at the end. I haven't heard any sort of animal make that sound. We could hear something walking through the bamboo the original night before we decided to go back there. So maybe it was just observing us. And it also didn't make any noise when we encountered it. It's definitely messing with us now though. My friend slept with the window open the other night for the breeze, and she said the neighbor's motion light turned on and illuminated her room. Then, a few minutes later, something walked in front of the light, blocking it. She was too scared to look. I don't blame her. I wasn't really focused on its face as much as its body. I did see that it had a nose, but it was really flat, like Voldemort's nose. My friend I was with was staring at its face the whole time, and she said that its eyes weren't reflecting any light, which I also saw. They said it looked really sunken in and didn't really see any eyes per se. It didn't really have eyes, and I didn't see a mouth. I just glanced at its face and assumed it wasn't looking at us, and I went back to looking at its weird body. Update. So my friends and I were having another fire because my best friend had her family come over, and we thought it would be fun. We were starting the fire, and it took about 30 minutes to really get going because the wood was wet. The 10-year-old was the only one out there with us at the time, and I told her to go inside until the fire was ready. It was about 9 p.m. when it was ready, and she came back out with her older sister, 13, and I told her that they needed to be inside by 10. I said this for her safety because I've noticed that when it gets colder, this thing becomes more active. They agreed, so they eventually go inside around 10:30 p.m, and it's just me and my 2 friends out there now. Around the fire, we kept hearing some foxes and coyotes around, but they weren't really close to us, so we didn't pay them any mind. Eventually, the animals stopped making noises, and it got eerily quiet out. I walked to my friend's car to get the flash out they bought because we knew we were going to hear some animals out and wanted to be prepared. As soon as I opened the trunk, we all hear a screech in the bamboo 6 feet away from me. We could hear something walking around in the bamboo and kept hearing noises on the roofs around us. We started getting a little freaked out, but just determined it to be the wind blowing in the bamboo and the houses settling. This went on for about 20 minutes. My friend went to the car to get more wood from her trunk, and of course we went with her. We all heard the same screech sound again when she opened the trunk. We quickly run back to the fire and make it bigger and start prepping our weapons. I was holding the flashlight with my skewer we were using to cook hot dogs over the fire. I was calling it a tactical harpoon. My friend had a hot, giant stick, and my other friend had a pocket knife. When we kept hearing weird noises, I turned the light on and we were looking around in the bamboo, and we all could have sworn we saw eyes reflecting around us multiple times. A few times in the bamboo about 6 feet off the ground, and we saw it on top of the garage at one point. So we're on orange alert because things aren't feeling quite right. What made us red alert was hearing clicking noises from the bamboo. It was so loud that we all stopped mid-conversation and heard it. It would stop and you would hear movement around us, and then clicking from another spot. It was circling us. We could hear running and steps on the roofs again. We were panicking to put the fire out and go inside. The hose was off, so we had to scoop water from the pool. I was guarding them while they were putting out the fire. I was yelling at my friend to run to her car and lock her doors after they put out the fire. We grabbed the leftover hot dogs and ran inside. We then had to go back outside because my friend thought she left her car keys out there. So we were bumbling around out there for about 2 minutes before we said no more and ran inside. I checked my phone once we finally sat inside, and we were situated in front of the window with it cracked to listen to the noises and see if it was still out. My friend texted me and said she saw it. She said, after I pulled out of the driveway, something flashed across the road, and it was too white and too tall to be a deer. Like, I see deer all the time at my house, so it definitely wasn't that. But it came out by the neighbors and then went back around, almost like it was circling or something. I asked her to describe it more if she could, and she said, I really wish I could, but it was so fast. Like, it was all white but reflective eyes, and it was really tall. Way too tall to be a deer, but it was gone in a split second, but I could still tell where it was going. I still don't know if it was being aggressive or not, or just being creepy and curious and messing with us. My friend said it sounded like it was hunting, and I kind of agree because we've never heard the clicking before.
Several years ago, an old friend and I were walking on this bike trail in northwest Arkansas. Oddly enough, she had made a comment about how it was a strange night and mentioned that she was feeling pretty weird. It wasn't long after we heard what sounded like a baby crying, or like a cat wailing in pain in the tree line next to the bike trail. Our first thought was that there was either an injured animal or possibly a mama cat in labor. We skimmed through the trees but found nothing. We took a few steps forward when a humanoid creature stepped out from the trees and began to cross the bike trail in front of us. It was probably close to 7 feet tall, extremely slender, with knobbly knees and elbows. It was all black, with long arms that hung past its knees, and it was slightly hunched. We only got the side view, but from what I could tell, it had no facial features at all. But it did have an odd-shaped head. I would say more of a diamond than your rectangle. I remember its head coming to more of a point. It was so long-legged that it had walked out from the tree line, took one step in the middle of the bike trail, and then with the other foot, it had reached the other side and disappeared through a fence. The girl I was with looked at me, panicked, and said, "What do we do?" Because at this point, it was either continue past the creature or turn around and run back past whatever that wailing noise was coming from the tree line. Needless to say, I ended up saying, "Run," and we turned around and did not stop running until we ended up back at our apartment, slamming the door behind us. I actually went back the next morning because the way it had vanished into the fence almost seemed as though there had to be a hole the creature had walked through. But when I went back, there was nothing but solid fence all the way down. No sign of anything from the night before. Although I was never able to see it again, a few weeks later, a friend of mine told me that if you revisit sites of activity, some things can attach themselves to you. So I've never been back since I heard that.
Until now, I had no idea what crawlers were. This happened in the Canadian province of Saskatchewan in winter 2015. It happened around Christmas time, so we had lots of snow, and it was very cold, -25°C. My dad was driving my sister and me to a small city that we lived near. It was only 6 p.m, but it was already dark. We only live about 10 minutes out of town, so it's not like we were in the middle of nowhere. However, the 2-lane highway is unlit and very dark. I was in the back seat, my younger sister in the passenger. Suddenly, I noticed something in the headlights. Something ran across the road in front of us. It looked not quite black, but maybe a dark brown or grey. It was so fast, my dad didn't have time to brake or react, and then it was gone. What the heck? My dad's eyes widened. I couldn't believe what I had seen. It was almost dog-like, or maybe more like a deer, but certainly wasn't either of those things. It was a dark blur. It looked like a lanky humanoid, but with very long limbs and ran on 4 legs. It was about the size of a large dog or small deer, but its front and back legs bent like a human's arms and legs. I was too stunned to say anything. All I could think was, what the hell did I just see? My younger sister looked at my dad and then me, her mouth wide open. "You guys saw that too?" she asked. I nodded, eyes wide. We spent the rest of the drive feeling uneasy, my dad speeding faster than he usually does. I was so relieved when the first streetlight appeared in the city limits. We still bring it up to this day, still as confused and spooked as when we saw it.
I had a very disturbing encounter about 6 years ago with a tall, humanoid being, 8 to 9 feet tall, in my home. It matches all of the descriptions of a crawler, almost anorexic, with elongated arms and fingers, but the encounter I had was strange. I remember waking from my nap to hearing what I assumed was my boyfriend returning with food. My house has my bedroom on the basement level, and my kitchen, living room, entranceway, front door, and home bathroom is on the floor above me. There are cushioned stairs descending to my bedroom that, when walked on, make a loud tromping noise, and my boyfriend has a familiar way of running down them that I always recognize. I had taken a nap while he went to go get food, when I was woken up by the loud sound of tromping, of what sounded exactly like his feet running down the stairs. Anyone with partners, kids, family members knows you can identify every person's distinct way of walking. So I get out of bed and I walk to my bedroom entrance, all groggy. I knock over one of the cans on my bedside table, waking up. This is an important detail for later. My bedroom entrance faces slightly away from where the stairs end. I have 2 glass doors. I go to open them, when I see an 8 to 9 foot tall being staring right over my head. I'm 5'10", and this thing was not staring at me, which I remember distinctly. I was craning my head up to get a look at its face. It had glowing white-yellow light emanating off of it. I remember my hallway downstairs being illuminated. Its body was skinny and pale, white beige. It had no mouth, and eyes I don't quite remember, but are black and empty. It had outrageously long arms and fingers, and I remember being scared. It would touch me with them. This is the strongest memory I have. Its arms were in a hugging position, like a parent or significant other who wants you to come into their arms, wide and open, inviting arms. Most people would scream or run or do anything but just stare silently but this was all that I felt I could do. I felt drugged, almost. I crane my neck, staring at it for what feels like a short time, before I start getting feelings of calmness and tranquility, even care, love, flowing through my mind and body. I get the urge to go back to bed and to sleep. I remember being mortified once I realized that the thing in my bedroom doorway wasn't my boyfriend who had gone out to get food. So I don't know why I just returned to bed so calmly. It's almost like it sensed my fear, and with its outstretched arms, calmed me down telepathically, almost with a "stay calm and behave, it's alright" message. Despite the warmth of the encounter, I still felt like I had to be respectful. This being was vastly more powerful than me, or at least that's what I felt like it conveyed. Once I was in bed, and I glanced back to my doorway, I saw that it had left, or dematerialized. In hindsight, I remember feeling like a child obeying its parent during the encounter, even though I was 19. When my boyfriend finally got back, he woke me up, and I was terrified. This time I yelled, like all the repressed fear I had from earlier manifested. Importantly, that can I knocked over when I got back to the bedroom entrance was still on the ground. I picked it up when my boyfriend got back. I'm interested in knowing if what I saw was a crawler, or if it could have been an angel of some kind. Alien was one of my thoughts, but it was glowing, huge, and it didn't have a terrifying, menacing quality to it, other than when I first realized it wasn't my boyfriend. As I mentioned, I felt warm and cared for strangely. Sleep paralysis is also possible. But wouldn't I then have been paralyzed and unable to move, and unable to knock that can over?
So this happened about 2 years ago, in kind of upstate New York. I say kind of because I'm closer to NYC, but outside of Westchester. It has woodsy areas and inner city areas. Before my boyfriend and I lived together, we both lived with our parents. It was about a 15 to 20 minute walk if you took the regular sidewalk, but there's abandoned railroads that basically create a shortcut. These tracks, to me, are scary because a lot of homeless people live there. Not that I'm afraid of homeless people, but I don't want to bump into one on abandoned tracks at night. There's also been violent crimes that happened on them, and a semi-famous serial killer has even killed on these tracks in the early 90s. Basically, as a kid, I was told to stay away from it, for obvious reasons. So fear of this railroad was inflicted on me at a young age. Anyway, my boyfriend was walking home from my mum's one night and calls me, breathing heavily and freaking out, telling me he saw a skinwalker. I had literally no idea what these were until he told me, and I honestly thought he was making things up. He described it as hunched over, naked and pale, big, piercing, reflective yellow eyes, and very, very skinny. His height was about 5'8", the head regular size, mouth regular. His arms and legs were longer than his body. He was naked with absolutely no clothing on, no hair, literally almost identical to Voldemort from Harry Potter, or the Lord of the Rings Gollum. It made a deep clicking sound that almost sounded like a growl, and when the thing noticed that he noticed it, it let out a huge shriek, at which point he ran the rest of the way home. I didn't believe him, but he's a tough guy, and I could hear the fear in his voice, So I was concerned and did some research. Maybe 2 days later, in the day, we were walking in a different but close area of the tracks and found a pretty much newborn baby deer with a piece of its backside pretty much ripped out, like something grabbed it and ripped a chunk of its body out. It was sad and terrifying because there's nothing in my area that would have done that, and birds would have picked at the entire body, not just a small part. A day or so later, the entire body of the baby deer was gone. That's the moment I believed him, and when I started joining communities on crawlers and cryptid creatures.
I'm 27 and a female, and my boyfriend was 24 when this happened. It was about 2 years ago, and in the middle of the night. I decided to share this because it still haunts me to this very day, and I still have nightmares about it. It was about 2 a.m. one night in September. We live about 25 minutes out of town in northern British Columbia, Canada, and our house is surrounded by the woods. Because it's such a dead road, usually we would pull out of the driveway and then turn on our lights. Why? I don't know. It's just a weird habit. We would both do it. Not anymore though. We always put the lights on now. So I'm driving, I pull out, go to the left, down the road, and turn on the high beams. Then we see it. In the road is this weird, hairless, pale, humanoid creature, crouching in the middle of the road. It almost seemed to be glowing, but that was probably because it was such a pale white, and I hadn't turned off my high beams. It whipped its head at us, as if it was surprised by our lights turning on. After a second, it shambles across the rest of the road in jerky movements, and down into the ditch, which was about 3 foot deep. We both watched as it went down into the ditch, turn around to face us. And then it stood up on its back legs, exactly like a human, but not quite. Except it stood over 5 feet higher than the ditch, taller than our car at the time. So this creature was over 7 feet tall. It looked aggressive, hunched at the shoulders, and leaning forward slightly, as if to look at the car. And I swear, I made eye contact with it. No, it was not watching us drive by. It wasn't looking at the car. It was looking through the window, and it was looking right at me. Whatever it was intelligent, and knew that the car wasn't moving itself. It knew we were inside. I drove so slowly, turning my head, and keeping eye contact with it as we drove past, and it did the same, craning its head to watch me leave. My boyfriend couldn't see it past me at that point. Eventually, it's out of my vision, and I look back at the road. We are both completely silent, and I'm driving less than 10 kilometers an hour, having taken my foot off the gas when I saw something in the road. To this day, I don't really tell people, because the people I tell just laugh it off, or try to explain it as an albino starving bear or something. Now, this year, his parents were visiting, just before winter hit. They have a dog. Me and his mum are having a smoke on the deck, which is about 6 feet off the ground. It's dusk, not much light. We were on the left side of the deck, the same side we turn on the road to go to town. You can see the patch of woods where the creature would have been before, so this instance happened in the same little area. I hear a bunch of cracking twigs just as the dog goes nuts. He is a small boy, so we were surprised when he almost jumped off the deck to run into the woods. My boyfriend comes out just in time, and we see, just beyond some trees, so it's obscured, a tall, lanky white form. But we couldn't see anything else definite, and his mum has terrible eyesight and didn't have her glasses. I know it was the same creature. I got this twisting feeling in my gut. I decided to share this because, if anything, at least there might be some people out there who could believe me. We don't leave our house at night. Maybe it's weird, but I want to see it again. There's such a huge difference, man. I used to think, wow, these stories are cool, so I believe in them. It was nothing compared to the awed terror I felt when I made eye contact with something. I'm positive it's not natural. I literally think about it every single day, and it can actually bring me to tears because it scares me so much.
Let me preface this by saying this happened around 10 years ago. Also, I've always been very skeptical of paranormal stuff, and I'm not at all superstitious. But one encounter will always stick with me. I grew up with my grandparents in a quiet suburb outside Washington, D.C., and our house was only a few hundred yards from a large park called Sleepy Hollow Woods. I always used to play in the woods as a child, alone or with friends, and never had any issues. I loved the outdoors and explored the woods thoroughly. However, I would never stay out after dark, of course. My mother grew up here as well, and would always tell stories about the woods, and believed they were haunted. She's had plenty of creepy things happen with her. For instance, when she was younger, they had 2 family Labradors. They were super friendly, and my mother and uncles would walk them through the woods all the time. One time, my mother was walking alone with the dogs around dusk when she came across what she describes as a ripped-off deer haunch lying covered in blood in the middle of a trail. There were no other deer parts, or body, or blood anywhere to be seen. Just this random, bloody leg. She described it as having the appearance of being ripped off, definitely not cut. Obviously freaked out, she took the dogs and just started heading home. All of a sudden, near the exit of the park, the dogs completely froze in their tracks and just started growling into the tree line. This was very unlike them, as they were super friendly with both people and other animals, and were quite large and never feared anything. However, as my mother kept trying to pull them along and see what they were growling at, their tails went between their legs and they started whimpering, refusing to move forward. It was then that my mum said she saw a large, almost 8-foot, dark figure with glowing red eyes move between the trees, staring right at her. She immediately turned around with the dogs and fled, taking a different exit out of the woods. My uncle has also said he'd seen the red-eyed giant before, but never a clear view, always a silhouette. Keep in mind, there are no bears or anything of the sort around here that could or would do that to a deer. On another occasion, some years later, my mum recalled walking with our old golden retriever near the woods. Again, the retriever was the sweetest dog in the world and loved everybody, but my mum came across an old, creepy lady feeding and talking quietly to some wild rabbits on one of the sidewalks on the trail. Immediately, the dog started growling at the woman, something my mother has never heard her do before. My mum immediately apologized to the lady and walked around her with her dog, tugging her along. As she continued to walk, She came across a circle of rabbits, all standing perfectly still and staring at her. My mum promptly ran home. By the way, this was Roundtree Park in Sleepy Hollow Woods, which is off of Sleepy Hollow Drive. The park only constitutes a small portion of the woods. There are other stories associated with it. For instance, back in the 60s or something, 2 young boys went missing and sparked a huge countrywide man search, but they were never found. Another creepy, notable landmark, deep in the woods, is a random-ass broken-down yellow school bus, overgrown with trees and bush, literally dilapidating away in the middle of the woods, nowhere near any roads. My mum said she came across that too when she was a kid. There's a large creek flowing all the way through the woods, but no lake. I've never followed it all the way down, out of the woods, because at some point it becomes literally overgrown. I used to catch little crayfish as a kid though. There also used to be a little backward paintball fort set up by some local teens, and a hangout spot used by potheads for generations, which are basically 3 large graffiti-covered boulders. LARPers would come and do, well, LARPing, with the foam swords and stuff in a big open field. I used to sit and watch them duke it out. As far as spooky stuff goes, the missing boys and random school bus are the most notable, outside of the paranormal stuff we and a few of our neighbors experienced. For instance, when my friend was a kid, like 12 or so, he was walking through the woods at night, and something started throwing gravel stones at him from the tree line, and he lived in a completely different zip code on the other side of the forest. Not long ago, my girlfriend was driving to my grandparents' house and passed a circle of bunnies standing around on the sidewalk, just staring as she passed, in the same area and street that my mum had long ago. Plenty of murders and bodies found there over the years. Those woods are huge and stretch for miles. The park and trails only make up a small part of the forest. My mother and uncles have other stories, but I always thought they were full of it, either just imagining things or making them up to scare me, since I've played in those woods so many times and never had any issues. However, my older brother used to go on nightly walks through the woods, and he told me he's seen the red-eyed monster and other mysterious creepy encounters. I was around 15 or 16 at the time and loved ghost stories, and never encountered anything like that, so I was able to convince him to go out ghost hunting with me. Of course, I thought this was a silly bunch of rubbish anyway. The first time we went out, we had a few friends over. We were hanging out late at night, smoking weed and telling ghost stories. Of course, we mentioned the haunted forest. We were living at a house down the street from our grandparents at the time, so practically next door to the woods. My friends all thought it would be fun if we went out into the forest to search for some ghosts and monsters and have a good laugh. We waited until about 2 or 2:30 a.m. and headed out. There was a fairly large group of us, maybe 6 or 8 people total, including my brother and myself. As we're walking through this pitch-black forest, using our phones as flashlights, I kid you not, all the phones turned off at the same time. Of course, the girls in our group started freaking out, and to be honest, I'm pretty sure we all did. But we were also kind of laughing at the nonsense of it all. There was no noise anywhere other than us. The forest was completely dead silent, and after a few minutes, everyone was able to get their phones turned on and working again. We decided to head home at that point. Could have been a freak accident, I'm not really sure. The second time, I went with my brother and a couple of other friends. This time, a much smaller crew. I think maybe 3 or 4 of us all together. Same as before, we thought it'd be fun and silly to go out ghost hunting at night and see my brother's little Sasquatch friend. This time was different, however. The moment we entered the forest, things got weird. The forest felt unnaturally dark, and our lights barely reached the tree line on either side. We brought flashlights this time. We also immediately felt a large sense of dread, danger, and adrenaline, and like we were being watched from all sides. Quite frankly, it was terrifying, as only moments before we were joking and laughing and telling ghost stories. But we all immediately shut up and felt it not even 30 yards from the road at the entrance to the forest. Whatever, we continued slowly walking deeper into the woods, talking and nervously laughing as we peered about with our flashlights. The forest was dead silent when suddenly, all at once, we heard what sounded like can only be described as several thousand monkeys screaming and screeching at us from the treetops and tree lines in all directions, all around us. The noise was overwhelmingly loud and deafening. I had never heard anything like it before or since. It's hard to describe, but angry, hateful monkeys, all crying out in anger at us, is the best way to describe it. And those cries were definitely targeted at us. The sense of danger and dread immediately jumped to 11, and we wasted no time in turning tail and sprinting for the forest exit. The sounds of 1,000 lost souls screaming incredibly loud, chasing us from above and around. Obviously, we saw no animals or anything in the trees or around us when flashing our lights up and about, but were also more preoccupied by getting the hell out of there. Like I said, we were only perhaps a few hundred feet from the entrance of the forest, so it took no time at all to get out. The moment we stepped out of the forest and into the light of the nearby street lamp, the forest felt dead quiet. Not a rustle, not a whisper. For those of you wondering, there are not any wild monkeys in these woods, nor anything else I could think of that would make those sounds. But those noises were loud and obviously terrifying. The third and final time I worked up the courage to go ghost hunting and find these evil little monkeys once and for all sealed the deal for me. I will never forget what happened on that night. A few months, or perhaps a year or so after our encounter with the angry monkeys, I was still upset that I had never encountered the red-eyed Sasquatch thing, and convinced myself that the prior experience was probably just some rabid foxes or something, even though it wasn't. My older brother agreed to go out into the woods one last time with me, as he didn't really fear anything, and to be honest, neither did I. I was some edgy-ass 15 or 16-year-old anyway. This time, if I heard them yelling at me, I was just going to yell at them back and demand them to show themselves, or something. I don't know. I just wanted to prove to myself that that night really happened, and I wasn't just crazy. The setting was perfect. A full moon, and it was about to hit 2 a.m. My brother brought a couple of knives and throwing knives, and I brought a large quarterstaff. I had black belt training in bow staff from my childhood. We set out on our little adventure. From the very start, things were different from the previous encounter, for the better. There was no unnatural feelings of being watched, no sense of fear or dread, no sense of panic. We walked all through the woods, sticking to the major paths. The occasional cricket chirp and the sounds of the nearby creek flowing downriver were the only noises we heard. At one point, a bush I was walking past bristled and something fled away, causing me to almost piss myself, but I figured it was probably a raccoon or a fox or something that had been spooked. After about an hour of pointlessly walking around, we decided to pack it in. As we started heading back home, my brother would occasionally stop in the path and begin listening intensely. For what? I don't know, as I heard nothing around us. He just said he thought he heard something. A few minutes later, he stopped and grabbed my arm tightly. I looked up at him, and asked what the hell was the big idea, as we were almost out of the forest and I just wanted to get home at this point. He quickly hushed me and told me to shut the hell up, so I did. Then he whispered that something was following us, though he never once turned around or anything. At that precise moment, I caught the worst goosebumps of my life and felt the presence staring at us from behind. I very slowly began to turn and look behind us. As I did, I saw, I don't know, a shadow or silhouette, literally creeping up behind us. It was standing near the exact same spot where everyone's phones had shut off that one time. The best way to describe what I saw was a large figure, 8+ feet, with glowing red eyes, silently walking down the path towards us. Once it saw that I had seen it, it immediately crouched low and dashed straight out of the path and into the tree line at full sprint without making a noise, and straight at us. I remember just yelling at my brother, "Run!" and we ran. The thing is, this thing started chasing us. I had never felt more danger, more raw hatred emanating from someone or something before. I knew it was going to kill us, and we were sprinting for our lives through this maze of a forest, and it chased us the entire way, just barely behind us. It must have been going fast to keep up, because we were booking it. I never turned around, nor did my brother. That would have slowed us down even a tiny bit, but we didn't have to, as we sensed it closing in. I could feel it reaching out to grab me by my neck or my collar, just inches keeping myself from it as I ran for dear life. At this point, we could also hear it clearly kicking up the gravel and dirt just inches behind us. Knowing there was no way we'd make it to the proper exit in time, I yelled at my brother to follow me off the main path and through a small hidden trail that I knew from my childhood. Gloriously, we burst out of the forest and into the lit lawn of what used to be my best friend's backyard. As soon as we got out of the forest and into the lights of the yard, we immediately stopped and turned to face our attacker, but it just stood there, just out of light and in the tree line, menacingly glaring at us with hatred and animosity. I never got a good view of it, not like I had when I first saw it on the trail creeping up on us, but I could sense it was there, and almost barely see a large, almost 8-foot figure or shadow moving amongst the tree line, staring us down. Full of adrenaline, I yelled at it to come out into the light and fight instead of creeping. I had my staff out in front of me, and my brother had a knife in each hand, and we were prepared to defend ourselves. Screw this guy. Suddenly, something hit me in the chest. Stunned, I looked down to see a few pieces of gravel from the main path we were on earlier standing at my feet. It threw it at me. My brother saw it too, and immediately threw one of his knives into the forest from where the rocks came, and we turned and ran home. We've never been back at those woods since, and will never be caught in them past dusk, if I ever go back at all. I don't know if it was an angry hobo or something living out in the woods or what, but from memory, the best I can describe what I saw was a very large male figure walking or creeping quietly up on us, and once it saw that I had noticed it, it hunched down low and sprinted silently into the tree line straight for us. I know for a fact that whoever or whatever it was, it meant to do us great harm. I've since heard stories of crawlers and other such things, and perhaps this was an example of one, I don't know. But my brother swears on his life that he didn't set that up to scare us or have anything to do with what happened, and that he was just as terrified as I was at the time. Oh, and he never did find his throwing knife. The dumbass actually went back to look for it in the morning. Unfortunately, my brother never got to see it. He said he heard and sensed it following us, but he never got a view of it. Anyway, I don't know what the deal is with that forest, but I highly recommend everyone to stay far, far away from it at night. And yeah, for a skeptic, I can agree that it's unlikely that was a person. In fact, I'm certain it wasn't. I've always thought of it and referred to it simply as the creeper. And yes, it did have glowing red eyes. Well, that's the story of Sleepy Hollow Woods. I know, hell of a name for a forest. Update. A few more things of note. One of my other brothers, when he was about 11 or 12, was walking through the forest with his best friend when something started throwing gravel stones at them too from the tree line. They ran into the forest, chasing after it with their flashlights, but found nobody. He's never been back after dark since. The same brother, just a few months ago, was dropping off a friend at my grandparents' house, and as he was driving by our old house, which lies across from the forest, a very old lady was slowly walking across the middle of the road, clutching something to her chest. He thinks she was holding her shawl. It was rainy, cold, and in the middle of the night, so he pulled over and asked if she needed any help. As soon as he did, she began screaming and yelling at him while sprinting straight for his open window, all the while holding her arms to her chest. He promptly reversed the hell out of Dodge. There have been multiple known sightings of a ghost lady wandering around, clutching her babe to her bosom. Legend has it that she lost sight of her child and he got lost. His body was found several days later, and to this day, she holds him in her arms and yells at anyone trying to enter the forest at night. One particularly messed up story involves a guy in 2016 who was studying waterfowl and local birds and followed some ducks off the beaten path and deep into the woods. His cell phone mysteriously died and wouldn't turn on, and at that moment, a lady came walking through the woods, clutching something to her chest. He hid behind a tree and she wandered off. He followed her out of curiosity. She was acting weird, and it was nearly dusk out and raining on top of that, and they were miles from the nearest trail. He followed her and stumbled upon 3 tiny shed-like houses. As he did, his adrenaline jumped to 11, and he lost all sense of hearing. The lady was standing beside the middle house, clutching something to her chest, and smiling, flashing her teeth. His flight instincts kicked in, and he ran all the way out of the forest for his life. The moment he got away from her, his phone turned back on with 85% battery left. I wonder if she was the same woman my brother saw. Was she responsible for turning off everyone's phones that one time? Come to think of it, when my brother grabbed my arm and I saw the creeper that one time, it was standing in the exact same spot that the phone thing with my friends had happened. At least I can clear my mum and my uncle's name in terms of their sanity and seeing stuff in the woods.